In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this. Let's jump right in. The people who make the Stray Blade video game reached out to me and asked me to make this, and I thought, why not? This is a super cool helmet, and you guys are always asking about video game armor, so here is your first video game armor from Armor Templates. Hope you like it. I use 20 gauge steel for this, so I can get a lot more detail into it. And I'm at the dishing stump here, putting some shape into the helmet halves, which will come together and make the top of the helm. Watch the edges. You got to make sure to come back and shrink these back down so they don't wrinkle too hard on you. As you can see, it looks terrible, but a little bit of work with the English wheel and it is perfect. I know not everyone has an English wheel, but if you have the means to get one, you should. Definitely one of the most used tools in my shop. Well worth the money. As you can see, it's very easy to get it nice and flat. Now, of course, the edges aren't quite straight anymore, so we're going to have to come back and work on that a little bit. And to do that, basically all we're going to do is we need one straight edge, so we're going to use some masking tape. And I'm going to choose this edge, and we'll just cut this straight. Now I'm using a file to make sure that the edges are flat against this bench here. And from that line, we'll mark all these new lines. But before we get too far into this build, let's talk about what Stray Blade is. Embark on an unforgettable journey and discover the story of Akria and its ancient legacy. Discover the whole history that turned the peaceful valley into a place of war and death. Use this knowledge to destroy the relics of the past and restore peace in the war-torn valley. The hyper-responsive combat system allows quick reaction and precise attacks to fully control flows of battle. It merges strategic anticipation of enemy attacks with split-second blade-to-blade reactions, the high noon of the melee weapon combat. Encounter the God Kings that ruined the land in the past. Bring their legacy to fall and free the land from the shadows of the old era. Harvest their powers and use them to unravel the mysteries of Akria. New dominions are waiting to be unlocked. Akria's colorful world ranges from overgrown city ruins to frozen caves and winding canyons. Together with your companion Boji, explore the deepest corners of a world bristling with adventure. Every discovery holds treasures. Find rare materials, recipes, weapons, lore pieces, and beautiful places. And this is how I imagine Farron, the protagonist of Stray Blade, putting the antlers on his newest helmet every time his head grew too big. You know, the antlers were Farron's personal lucky charm. He has used the same antlers throughout his life because, as a kid, he thought they would protect him from all evil. And though being a man of little superstition, they have been around ever since. Make sure to find links and information about Stray Blade in the description beneath this video. Now I've got this stuck together with some magnets temporarily, and I'm just going to weld this together. A lot of you armoring purists might be upset that I welded in this tutorial, but actually in the medieval era you could have things welded. You had to just go to your local wizard. Going to get rid of some of these ugly weld beads. Flux core welding is definitely going to leave some ugly pitted holes and stuff, but I kind of wanted that to add to the effect, which we will go into a little bit later on. This is my homemade flange tool. Fans of the channel have seen this made in a previous video. And I'm just going to start bending over a flange on each of these parts. I think I made 4 passes, and then I was able to use a hammer and dolly and just flatten these flanges down. This is actually a lot easier than you think it is. Now I'm adding some detail to the side of the helmet. This is where the antler horns come out, and this needed to be done after I welded it together because there's no way to make sure these were lined up in the proper spot until both of these parts were put together. Now I'm using a blunted air chisel, and I'm just cleaning up a line a little bit there at the top. Now for the crest that goes on top of the helmet, I'm going to go ahead and start with a strip of metal and just bend this and shape this and curve this until it fits the top of the helmet. I mean, obviously this would not fit if it were flat, so it has to be curved like the helmet top is. And this is getting pretty close. I'm going to put a tiny flange on the end of this too to make it look like it's made of thicker metal. Now I'm drilling some holes and some corresponding holes in the helmet. These are called Cleco clips, and they're temporarily holding it in place. And now I'm making the actual crest itself, and I'm just bending over the top to give this a bit more of a three-dimensional shape and thicken this up. Now using magnets again to hold it together, I'm going to go ahead and weld it. Ooh, look at those ugly welds. Well, this isn't a welding channel, this is an armoring channel, so... anyway, I have some 1/8 inch material in here that I've drilled and tapped, and I am holding it to the helmet with some small bolts. If you don't do this, it's going to change shape on you and no longer fit. So you want to make sure if you do something like this that you attach your parts together and then do your welding. Now these welds in here, I'm going to clean them up obviously, but this is the worst possible spot to put welds because they're so hard to clean up. I didn't know any other way to do it though, so this is not ideal, but this is the only way I can figure out how to do it. Here I have some MDF hammer forms. I actually got rid of the one here at the end here, but I will go into that later. This is to make the pieces that the antlers come out of, so you will see what they'll look like in a second. Now all I did was just hammer on this. First I hammer with a large hammer to get some of the metal down in there, and then a little bit smaller hammer just to begin to take some of the details. As you can see, we've got some detail here, but it's not really nice enough. So using the other hammer form, I am now hammering into the recess there and cleaning up the details much more. Now this one you can see I've got some small holes. I tried to fill this in with some epoxy to make it a little bit nicer, but I decided to rebuild it, so I discarded it. After heating up this metal, because I was hammering on it so much I didn't want it to break, I heated it up and then used a hammer, a couple of hammers, to hammer this thing into the hammer form. And this worked out really well. Now I've got magnets again that I'm going to weld. I'm going to weld around this thing. Once again, terrible place to weld, but I didn't know any other way to do it. Now this is a very complicated hammer form that I've got for the face mask portion of this helmet. And as you can see, this will actually be able to flip over, so I can do both sides, and they'll be identical. And I've got some corners rounded off, and this is the part that I'm going to make. You've got corresponding holes, and you can see I've got some slits cut, and that is to relieve some of the pressure on the metal as I shape it. Screw it down and start hammering onto the sides. And this takes the shape of the hammer form very easily. Now once you get on the inside here, it's harder to get the hammer in there, so it takes a little bit more work. I ended up using a chisel, the same chisel I used before, to go ahead and hammer that down. Now the corners where you see me working here, they're going to break. You can't avoid it. And it's actually a good thing in my case because there's no way to actually bend this thing afterwards, which I'll show you in a second here, without having those broken. So you can see here I've got some parts marked out where I have to cut, and you can see the breaks right there. I'm straightening it with a pair of pliers, and now I have to curve this, and that would not allow me to curve it if all of those corners didn't break, if that makes sense. It would be too strong of a part. So now that I've got it bent by hand, you can see it looks good. And now I've got it marked out, and I welded them together, made sure that the angle is what I wanted. Just a couple of tacks there to hold it together. Now you can see I have to go ahead and weld up those little breaks. Now that this is bent and it's in perfect shape, I can weld those up. This is a slip roller. Actually, it's a pinch roller, but most people would call that a slip roller. It just basically makes rounded parts. A couple of passes is all it takes. And once again, welding, welding, welding. And grinding, grinding, grinding. Now the helmet itself, not the helmet top, but the helmet itself, will also get a flange. And again, this is much easier than it looks. This is just trash I got off the floor, a little welding spatter and stuff like that. And this was an experiment actually, I didn't know if it would work or not, but I just hammered on it lightly on an anvil. And as you can see, it makes the metal look very pitted and old, which is exactly the look I was going for. And a little bit of sandpaper. Very randomly sanded. And also, this is a really cool part too. I used a chisel and just made some dings and dents all over the thing. Makes it look very authentic. This is the visor. It goes above the eyes. Again, welding this on the helmet so as not to change the shape of it. I didn't have any stock big enough to make the square bolts that are rivets, I guess, that hold this thing together, but I was able to actually find some really big bolts and use those. Now this is made by, it's not a hammer form, I guess you call it a press form, I'm not sure. But just a piece of aluminum that has the right cutout behind it, and this small corresponding rectangle. You could ignore the hole in it, it doesn't really matter. But just tape these into position, put them in the vise, and squeeze it together, and you end up with these lovely little divots that are the perfect shape for these. Now these little holes in the back are drilled and tapped, so they actually accept a very small bolt. Now I'm going to weld the top and bottom of the helmet together at the seams here. Looks nice. Now I want some big dents in this thing. The artwork that was sent to me had some battle damage, so I wanted to make sure this thing was properly beat up some. This is Perma Blue, which is actually a chemical way to blue metal or darken metal. This stuff worked really well for the most part, but I had to do a lot of coats on it. The visor and the crest and the neck plate in the back are darker than the actual helmet, and so it took a lot of work to get those dark, but the overall look was really nice. I really like this stuff a lot. And it was pretty easy to do. Just make sure and keep it clean. Follow directions and keep the metal clean, and you should do just fine. Now I'm taking off a lot of that blackness because it's too dark, so I took some of it off. And you basically just protect this with oil. Any oil will work, but I use 30 weight motor oil because it's a little bit thicker and it wouldn't you know, drip off as it was sitting overnight. And here's all of the parts. Look at that beautiful finish. Lovely. This little complicated part, these two holes here are tapped for a small bolt. This is welded on, and this hole will be used for the antler. I just go ahead and bolt those into position, and I've added a magnet here, one of those rare earth magnets in the center. There's your bolt. And this is how these attach. I have to send this thing to London for the video game company, and so there's no way I could ship it without being able to dismantle this thing, because it's huge. This is EVA foam floor mat and barge contact cement. You cosplayers know what this is. Basically, once it tacks off, once it's not so wet, you can stick these together and the bond is permanent. And I just layered up multiple layers of the floor mats. This makes sure that I have very lightweight antlers in the end. And I used my die grinder tool to go ahead and shape these things down and get them a little bit closer to antler shape. I made them a little bit small because I had to add this warbler on top, which was going to add just a little bit more thickness in the end. What happened? My heat gun broke, so I had to buy a new one. Anyway, this stuff was actually a real pleasure to work with. I'm very impressed with it. Never worked with Warble before, but basically just heat it up and you can bend it to whatever shape you need, and it sticks to itself. So you can kind of get rid of the seams and make it look like whatever you want. I was very impressed. Here I'm using a little aluminum rod to press it into the correct shapes. Nice and tight. And I'm using a soldering iron to make some details near the helmet. This is like something like what an antler looks like anyway. This little part here, as you can see, is also removable. And it just slips down into place. You can see there's two rods there that keep it from twisting. And the magnet holds it in place. Very nice. Now for some paint. This is just some watered down acrylic paint. Used browns and tans and multiple coats to try to build up the right colors. And then I used a spray paint, satin clear, to protect it. This is just upholstery foam left over from an automotive project in the past, and some very nice suede leather. And I want to make some diamond pattern in this thing. And actually, I have them marked out, but you can't see them in the video there. But I'm using my touch mark. I didn't sign this piece anywhere. I didn't want to ruin the look of anything, so I went ahead and just put my touch mark on all of the diamond panels on the inside. Now I'm using some wax cord to make some sewed patterns. And here's the top of it all sewn in, and I just glued it in with barge. A very special thank you to 505 Games and Point Blank Games are making this video possible. Make sure to click the link in the description to find more information on Stray Blade.